Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the Reign of Bahram Gur. The next morning, Bahram returned to his hunting grounds, and for a month he and his entourage stayed on the plain, both following the paths and going by unfamiliar ways. They camped in tents and pavilions and emptied the area of game. There was no sleeping on that plain while they were there, only hunting, wine and the sounds of music, and fires burning both dry and green wood lit up the landscape. People looking for a profit came out of the city to trade with the hunters. A lively market was set up, and the waste places bustled with activity. Anyone could find game and ducks to buy to take home to their children, and guests by the donkey load. And a month Bahram was overcome with a desire to sleep in his harem again. He and his men began their return, and the dust they sent up obscured the roads. They rode quickly until the day turned purple with dusk, when they saw a little town filled with houses, streets, and shops ahead of them. Bahram ordered his men to continue on their way with the baggage, while he would stay there alone that night. He asked who the local landowner was, and made straight for the house. He saw a wide, deep, broken-down doorway. The owner appeared and bowed before him. Bahram said, "Who is this ruin, and what is a ruin doing in the middle of the village?" The owner replied, "This house is mine, and you can see what a past bad luck has brought me. I've no cows, no clothes, no donkeys, no knowledge, no courage, and no strength. You've seen me. Now come and see my house, which is more deserving of curses than praises." Bahram's limbs were weak with fatigue. He dismounted and looked about the house. The floors were covered in sheep droppings, but it was a fine building, large and spacious. Bahram said, "You seem a hospitable man. Bring me something to rest on." The man replied, "Why are you mocking me? There are no carpets here, as you can see, and there's no food here either. You had best look for another place to eat and rest." Bahram said, "At least bring me a cushion so that I can sit for a while." The man replied, "A cushion? That's absurd. You might as well expect milk from a bird." "Well," Bahram said, "just bring me some warm milk then, and if you can find it, some bread that's not stale." "Pretend I gave it to you," the man replied, "and that you ate it and you felt satisfied. If there was bread to eat, then I assure you, you'd see a much more healthy coast than before you." Bahram asked, "If you have no sheep, how is it your house is full of their droppings?" "It's dark already. Look," the owner said. "This talk of yours has muddled up my head. Go choose a house where they can entertain you, and where the owner will be happy to detain you. Why stay with someone unhappy wretch who grieves for his bad luck and has to sleep on leaves? You have a gold sword and gold stirrups, too. You don't want thieves to come and frighten you. A house like this attracts such dangerous men, and lions might well choose it as their den." Bahram said, "If thieves take my sword, I won't hold you responsible." The man replied, "Enough of all this chatter. No one stays in this house. That ends the matter." But Bahram persisted. "Why should a wise old man like you be so troubled by my presence? But I think you will have the magnanimity at least to give me a drink of cold water." He said, "Go back. 2 bow shots, and you'll see a pond. Drink all you want. Stop bothering me. It's obvious I'm old, worn out, and you're too weak to earn my living any more." Bahram replied, "If you've no nobility about you, at least don't quarrel with people. What's your name?" He said, "My name is Farshidvid, and I've no clothes or food to keep myself alive." Bahram asked, "Why don't you make some effort to earn your daily bread?" He said, "I pray for my release. I pray you leave my ruin and be on your way. What's brought you to this empty house? It's clear there's never any wealth or welcome here." And as soon as he'd finished talking, he began to weep and to wail so loudly that the king fled from the noise. Laughing at the old man, he left the town, and his entourage rejoined him. They came to a waste area covered with thorn bushes, which a man was chopping down with an axe. Bahram left the men and said to him, "You're a real enemy to those thorns. Who would you say is the most powerful man in these parts?" He answered, "Oh, that's Farshavid, a man who for years has hardly let himself eat or sleep, even though he owns 100,000 sheep and about as many horses and camels. The ground is full of the gold he's hidden there, and may he have neither marrow in his bones nor skin on his body. His belly's hungry, his body's naked, he has no children, no relatives, no friends. If he sold the farmland he owns, he could fill his house with jewels. His shepherds boil their meat in milk while he eats a measly bit of bread and cheese. He's never owned 2 sets of clothes at the same time. He has his body's own worst enemy." Bahram said to the thorn cutter, "If you don't know how many sheep he has, is there someone who does know?" The man replied, "My lord, no one knows how rich he is." Bahram gave the man some gold coins and said to him, "Now you've become someone to reckon with." He ordered one of his entourage to come forward, a man also named Bahram. He was a brave knight who charmed those who met him. The king also chose 30 horsemen selected for their suitability for the work he planned for them, together with a scribe who was a good accountant. Then he said to the thorn cutter, "Off you go now. You've cut thorns, and now you're going to harvest gold. Show these men the way to Farshavid's wealth, and you will get to keep 1/10 of it." The thorn cutter's name was Delafraz. He was strong and a fine figure of a man. Giving him a splendid horse, Bahram said, "You must make the wind your partner." Delafraz took the group to the mountains and the plains, and there they found innumerable sheep. And the mountains were 10 caravans of camels, each one with its own camel driver. There were draft oxen and milk cows, as well as wool, oil, buttermilk, and cheese. The whole plain was churned up with hoof prints. They found jars of butter kept in caves, and 300,000 cheeses stored in camel loads next to a stream. Bahram the king wrote to Bahram the king, beginning his letter with praise of God, who rules and nourishes all things, and invoking blessings on the king, who makes evil customs wither away. Then he continued, "King of the world, nobles and commoners rejoice in your reign. This Farshavid, whom no one's ever seen at either a banquet or a battle, whose name is unknown to both nobles and commoners, who is loyal neither to his king nor his God, and who does not know what gratitude is, has untold wealth scattered throughout the world while he sits hidden away, empty-handed and bent with grief. His injustice is, and do not take what I'm saying as a sin, an extensive as the king's justice. You can make a great treasury of his wealth, and 3 years will be not enough to reckon it all up. I've summoned scribes and installed them in the mountains here. Their backs are bent with work. But I've been told that he has hidden under the earth more gold and jewels than we have already found, and the extent of his riches is not apparent yet. I wait in the mountains for your orders. Greetings from me to the king of Iran, and may his fame live forever." He sent a swift messenger to the king with his letter. When Bahram Gur read this missive through, he was saddened. His eyes were wet with tears, and his warlike eyebrows frowned. He summoned a scribe who brought a Byzantine pen in Chinese silk, and began his letter with praise of God, who confers victory and well-being, who is the Lord of knowledge and glory, and of the imperial crown. Then he wrote, "If I am to be just, I should not harass this man. He didn't amass his wealth by theft and bloodshed, nor did he lead anyone else into evil ways. His sin is in his ingratitude, the lack of any fear of God in his heart. He has been a guardian of this wealth, and the more he accumulated, the more his heart and soul withered away. What's the difference between having wolves or sheep on the plain if his sheep are not to be used for anything? What does it matter if one has jewels or gravel hidden underground, if the jewels are not to procure anyone food and clothing? I won't make a treasury of my own out of his wealth, because I won't tie my heart to this fleeting world. Feridun has disappeared from the world, and Iraj, Son, and Tur have gone from this nobility, as have Jamshed, Kavas, and Kobad, and the other great men whom we remember. My father, too, who grieved so many hearts, and who was neither just nor chivalrous, has gone from this earth. None of these great men are here now, and we cannot quarrel with God because of this. Gather Farshavid's wealth together, distribute it, and don't keep back one item from it. Give to those who have concealed their needs and who are unable to escape their poverty, to those who are old and unable to work, and are despised by the powerful, to those who have consumed their wealth and who are now left only with sorrow and heavy sighs, to those who still have a reputation but no money, and who have no one to help them among the merchants, to orphans whose fathers have died and left them without money, to women who have no husbands or no clothes and who have no skill or energy to earn their living. Give these people all this wealth, and rejoice the hearts and souls of those who have suffered. Although you have gone to search of Farshavid's riches, be just and temperate. Leave him the money and jewels he has hidden away, so that he won't live in want, even though they are like so much dirt to him, and that he has buried them deep in the earth. May the turning heavens be favorable to you, and may you act with justice and sobriety. They placed the king's seal on the letter, and the messenger returned with it. Word reached India, the western kingdoms, the Turks, and China, that Bahram was a pleasure-loving king, who gave no thought to anyone or anything, who sent out no lookouts or spies, and who did not trouble to place good warriors at his frontiers. It was said that he passed his time in entertainments, and had no notion of what was going on, either openly or covertly. When the Emperor of China heard this, he gathered an army from China and Khotan, distributed gold, and set off for Iran, believing that no one paid any attention to Bahram. And on the western frontier, the Byzantine emperor also raised an army to threaten the country. Hearing that the Byzantine and Chinese emperors had mobilized armies against their country, the Persian nobles, both young and old, came before Bahram Gur. They were angry and filled with bitterness, and spoke harshly to him, saying, "Your splendid good fortune has abandoned you. A military leader spends his time fighting with his army, but your heart is taken up with pleasure and banquets. In your eyes, the army and treasure are of no account, and neither are the crowns and the throne of Iran." The king replied to them, "The just God of this world, who is beyond the knowledge of the greatest of men, is my support, and I shall preserve Iran from the wolf's claws. With my fortune, army, sword, and wealth, I shall drive the threat back from Iran." He went on with the pleasures of his life as before, and the country's leaders wept bitter tears. Each of them said, "The hearts of honorable men are abandoning this king." Bahram was aware of this, and troubled by it. In secret, he built up his army, and no one knew of his preparations. The whole country was afraid because of the way he was living, and men's hearts were riven with anxiety. Everyone despaired of the king, despising both him and his rule. And when news reached the king that the Emperor of China's forces were menacing the frontier, he summoned Gashtam, who was a wise counselor and a fine warrior, and discussed the situation with him. He also summoned Bayezid, son of May-Perez, and Korad's son, May-Borzin, as well as Bahram's Perez, Khosravin Andian, the king of Gilead, the king of Ray, Dadborzin, who governed Zavalestan, and Borzameh, son of Karen. He gathered a force of 30,000 Persian warriors, men who were prudent and ready for combat. Next, he handed over the crown and throne to his brother Nursi, a wise man, just, God-fearing, and possessed of the divine fire, enjoying him to watch over the country's wealth and army. Then he led the forces he had gathered to Azerbaijan, because he was taking so many troops from Pars. Everyone, nobles and commoners alike, believed that he was fleeing from the war. When Bahram was on the march, a messenger arrived from the Emperor of Rome, and Nursi assigned him suitable quarters in the palace. Advisors sat with Nursey, and their talk was all concerning the king. They said, "He has given all he has achieved to the wind." Meanwhile, representatives of the army came to the chief priest and said, "He has scattered gold everywhere and doesn't know what behavior is appropriate for a youth. The country and the army are in turmoil, and everyone is trying to push his way to the top. Now we have no news of him, and we don't know whether to expect good or evil." After a long discussion, they agreed to send someone to the Emperor of China to try to prevent an attack so that the land of Iran would survive, even though its leader had fled. But Nursey said, "This is not what we should do. There's no channel in all the world for such waters to flow in. We have arms, wealth, and fine warriors. We are able to fight with fire and sword. Bahram has left with a few soldiers. Is that any reason for despair? If you think evil, evil will come to you. Why have your thoughts become so gloomy?" The Persians heard him out, but disagreed. "Bahram has taken his army, and it is right that our hearts are filled with melancholy. If the Emperor of China makes war on Iran, this country will forfeit all its splendor and glory. Neither the army nor Nursey will survive, and the invaders will trample us beneath their feet." The Persians chose a wise and knowledgeable priest called Shahnameh as the man best suited to represent them. Then they wrote a letter from Iran to the emperor, saying that they were his slaves, and that their heads were bowed, awaiting his command. And they wrote, "We will send what we can in the way of gifts and tribute from Iran to the Emperor of China, since we do not have the strength to resist the armies of Central Asia." Shahnameh and a group of noble companions took the Persian noble's letter and presented it to the emperor, whose heart rejoiced to see it. Shahnameh also told him of Bahram's hasty flight with his army, and the emperor's heart and soul opened like a blossoming flower. He said to his Turkish companions, "What sovereign has subdued Iran before by policy and plans without a war?" He showered gifts on the Persian envoy and gave him Chinese gold and silver coins. He composed his answer, "May wisdom be the companion of well-meaning men. I agree with all the messenger has said. I shall travel with my army as far as Marv, and make the countryside there as resplendent as the peasants' feathers. We shall wait for the Persian tribute and the gifts from her warriors. I shall halt at Marv and go no further, since I do not wish to inflict suffering on you and your armies." The messenger hurried back to Iran and reported all that he had seen and heard. The emperor came to Marv, and the world turned black with the dust sent up by its cavalry. When he had rested, he occupied himself with feasting, and no one gave any thought to Bahram. So loud were the sounds of harps and lutes in Marv that no one could sleep, and the army wandered across the plain in no order, without posting sentries or sending out bands of scouts. The emperor's time, day and night, was taken up with hunting, drinking wine, feasting, and the music of harps, and he gave no thought to war. He was watching for the tribute from Iran to arrive, and his heart grew angry that it was taking so long. But as for his part, Bahram stayed alert and preserved his army from the enemies. Day and night he sent out spies, and his own troops' whereabouts remained unknown. But he learned that the emperor and his forces were in Marv. He brought his men from the envoys of Arza Goshap. Each soldier traveled with 2 horses, his armor and a Byzantine helmet. Like a flood rushing down a mountain, they marched from Ardabil to Amal, and thence to Gorgan, and as their leader, Bahram, bore all the expedition's anxieties. They pushed on to Nissa, following a skillful guide through trackless mountains and deserts, traveling by both day and night. In the daytime, they sent out scouts, and at night posted sentries. And so they came to Marv more swiftly than a pheasant can fly. His spies informed Bahram that the emperor spent his days and nights carelessly hunting at Keshmihan, or closeted with his advisers, who was the spawn of Ahriman. Bahram rejoiced to hear this, and the pain of all of his efforts dispersed like the wind. He rested for a day, and when both he and his army were refreshed, Bahman made his way to Keshmihan. As the sun rose above the mountains, suddenly all the ears were filled with the blare of trumpets. All eyes were the colors of banners. The sounds of men's cries and the clash of arms rose up from the hunting grounds, splitting the ears of the king and his men. The emperor had been asleep, worn out by the hunt, and he woke to find that he had been captured by Khosravin. The earth of the battlefield was so soaked in blood that it seemed to have rained down from the moon. 300 Chinese noblemen were captured and slung across saddles, and the captured emperor's dream was shattered. Bahram marched from Keshmian to Marv. He had ridden so long and so hard that he was as thin as a reed. Few of the Chinese troops had remained in the city, and those who were still there were killed, and Bahram went in pursuit of those who had fled. He followed them for 30 leagues with Karen, bringing up the rear. Then he returned. He went to the hunting grounds and distributed plunder to the men. He lifted up his head in pride at his victory over China, and acknowledged that all power comes from God, who gives strength to both the good and evil, and who is Lord of the sun and moon. Bahram Gur rested for a week, and when he and his horses were refreshed, he decided to make war on Bokhara. Princely ambition rather than hunting and pleasure preoccupied him, and in a day and a night he had reached Amu. From there, in one watch of the night, he reached the sands of the river Oxus, and crossed at the town of Farab. When the sun turned the air yellow and cast aside night's black cloak, the dust of his armies made the world as dark as the Black Hawk's feathers. He pressed on through May and Marj, overwhelming the Turkish forces and setting fire to the countryside as he went. The stars clung to the moon's skirts for comfort, and fathers fled to their children for safety. The leaders of the Turks, both the elders and young warriors, came to Bahram on foot as abject supplicants, saying, "Great king, whose star has brought you victory, lord of the earth and its nobility, if China's mighty emperor betrayed you and went back on the promises he made you, you conquered him in war. The renegade is now your prisoner, and his debt is paid. Do not then shed the blood of innocents. Such cruelty mars a king's magnificence. If you want tribute, this is just but why should guiltless people be condemned to death? Our men and women are your slaves. We bow, defeated by your strength, before you now." Bahram's heart was wrung for them, and with a hand of wisdom he sewed shut the eyes of anger. The God-fearing king became thoughtful and forbade his warriors to shed any more blood. When it was clear that mercy prevailed with the king, the suppliants' hearts grew calm again. Their leader agreed to send a large tribute, and it was to be paid annually, and Bahram also imposed a fine on them. Smiling in content, he then made his way back to Farah, where he rested for a week. He summoned the Chinese nobles and erected a column of stones and mortar. He said that no one from the land of the Turks was to pass this column into Persia except with the king's permission, and that the river Oxus was to be the frontier between the two people. There was a man in the army named Shemer, who was wise, powerful, and from a fine family. Bahram made him king over Tehran. A gold crown was placed on his head, and all the land of Tehran rejoiced in his reign. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends.